Hello. Welcome again to another session of Public Affairs, Public Access. I'm your guest host, David Hutzelman, and tonight, as usual, we'll be discussing some local policy issues, primarily from a libertarian perspective. And sometimes I'm asked, what the heck is a libertarian perspective anyway? Well, libertarians are generally in favor of a free market economy and not the over-regulated, over-subsidized crony capitalist system that we have working today. And we're also pretty strong on civil liberties and really believe that people should have their own choice of peaceful lifestyles, whatever they may be, as long as they don't interfere with other people's equal right to do the same. I think we're also pretty skeptical of government spying, which certainly today with NSA hearings and with the issues about drones, kind of unite libertarians against a snooping, intrusive government. And so as such, you can see that we kind of form allies on the left and the right from most economic issues, and on the left from a lot of civil liberties issues. So we're hoping that we can carve out a major section of the center and unite people that are interested in liberty on both sides of the political spectrum. Well, tonight I have two Houston activists here at the table with me who are going to be talking about, as we move on, the main subject for tonight is maybe an esoteric subject for some of you that goes by the acronym of TIRZ, T-I-R-Z. You may know what these are. Their actual definition is the tax increment reinvestment zones, which are put into place by the city of Houston. And to most critics, comments are wind up making the rich richer and taking from the poor, if I could quote some of the more radical ones. But anyway, tonight we have with us, on my left, we have Charles Blain. Charles is the Houston representative of an organization called Empower Texans. Charles is a poli-sci graduate out of Farley-Dickinson in New Jersey and a somewhat recent resident to Houston, just getting accommodated to the high water and humidity here, I guess, probably. And has been working with Empower Texans, which is a statewide group in Austin, and he is the Houston representative, and they work on a number of issues that have to do with limiting government and protecting property rights and trying to eliminate crony capitalism from a lot of the government programs. So let me have Charles take a minute and tell you a little bit about Empower Texans.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Well, you know, he touched upon what we do. We began in 2006. We were created to kind of help Texans create and sustain a strong system of fiscal stewardship. So, you know, you see a lot of things going on within the state, across the state, of these government entities and these quasi-government entities just running through taxpayer funds. They just get a pocket full of money and they decide to spend it everywhere. So we really were created to help Texans understand policies that will increase economic and personal liberties and decrease the level of regulation that you know, burdens their lives. So we're based out of Austin, as you said. We have a pretty strong team there that focuses on the Texas legislature. We then spread out to a few different field offices. So we have Dallas, which Ross, he runs the Metroplex office. So that's Dallas, Fort Worth, and that whole general area. We also have our other field rep, Lauren, who runs our West Texas Bureau, and she deals with Midland and that general area. And then you have me out here in Houston and Greater Houston. So I've been, you know, focusing my efforts on Harris County and Montgomery County, Galveston County, just the whole area, which is, as you know, a big area. So it's pretty interesting. We're really trying to focus on policies that, you know, better represent the taxpayers and trying to get people more involved and to care a little more about their government. With things coming up with the Houston elections, such as charter reform involving term limit changes and involving the possible removal or change of the revenue cap, that's something that we want to be involved with, and we want to make sure that we're delivering the correct kind of information to these people so that they know how to go into the ballot box and what they should be voting for, and what a change to that would mean for them. So we really take the time to kind of research these issues and research these government entities and deliver the information in a non-biased perspective so that they can better make a decision on how to go about these things. And like you said, we are activists, so we do strongly believe in personal liberty and economic freedom and prosperity. So we do keep that in mind with everything we do, and that's what drives us to keep focused on these government entities, because too often they just grow unaccounted for, and people, you get the government that you vote for and you get the government that you don't pay attention to. So as long as you don't pay attention to them, they're going to keep growing unchecked. So that's why we're here.
Okay, that's great. That's a great charter for sure, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of libertarians that would certainly agree with those main points. You say that the term limits and the changing the revenue charter cap. We're going to probably talk a little bit more about that, the revenue cap in Houston, when we talk about the TERS, because that has an effect on that for sure. Any other projects that y'all have going, either statewide or in Houston, that our viewers would be interested in?
Yeah, well, statewide, we this legislative session, we started our Texas Scorecard, which is our print publication that comes out weekly. So we started that up to kind of deliver the news to people's homes. We have the internet copy of everything that we do, but we wanted to make sure that we were able to drive these points home, and we also have it in the Capitol. We have boxes in the Capitol with our newspapers there to deliver that.
Do you have a copy of that?
I do actually have a copy.
Why don't you hold that up? Maybe
yes.
Mark can get a...
This is our Texas Scorecard. So we started this so that we could, like I said, deliver the information directly to the people. And right now we're focused on growing that, letting people know that it is there, that they should look at this. When you're looking at other news publications, check ours out too, because we deliver very good information that some people might not be delivering. And, we've noticed that over the time of just being here in Houston, that we write things, on HISD, on TERSs, on the unincorporated areas, and on just the activities of these government officials that a lot of newspapers don't cover. So we're covering that side of the spectrum that for a long time went unnoticed. But that's really what we're focusing on, is just growing our base and really informing and engaging people and getting them excited to be involved in the government process. I think too many people are focused on national elections and national policies, and it's great, but you have less of an effect there. You have a strong effect back home when it comes to local politics and policies. So we're really trying to engage them and show them that, and Barry will speak more about charter changes and petitions. We're trying to engage them and show them that you can make a difference. Your voice is heard if you go out and put the effort in. So that's really our main project that we are focusing on, is really getting people excited, really getting them out there, deciding what they want to see in their government and then making it happen. Because, we always call these public officials our leaders, but they're not the leaders. The people are the leaders. The taxpayers are the leaders. We pay these public officials. They work for us, and they forget that a lot of times. So we're here to remind them.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate all the information that y'all are packing into that newsletter, but to be honest with you, I have a hard time getting through the one issue before the next issue comes up, Charles.
Yeah,
you might think about a bi-weekly instead of a weekly.
Yeah, I think so. Well, after the legislative session wraps up, we are going to change that up a little bit, but it is, chock full of information. We do have a lot of stories in there, and we try to keep them current.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Okay, my other guest here is a longtime Houston activist and friend, Barry Klein. Barry is the president and founder of the Houston Property Rights Association, an active local public affairs group that's been in existence since, the early 90s, Barry? Is that basically when it started?
We organized it in 1992, and there was a co-founder, and that was Meredith James.
Right.
You probably met Meredith.
Sure.
We organized to fight the plan to bring zoning to Houston, and Meredith and I bumped into each other, I guess, the year before. And he was actually a veteran of the campaign to stop zoning back in '48 and '62, and as a retired appraiser brought a wealth of information to the discussion that we had in the early '90s. Meredith and I were struggling to find a way to to stop zoning, and we came across the idea of amending the Houston Charter with the idea that even if they managed to adopt a zoning law before we got our charter amendment on the ballot, we could write it in a way that would overturn it and force them to go through the process again. And so what we ended up doing was find some others to work with us. We kicked off our petition drive in November 1992. And by the spring of the following year, it was pretty evident we were going to finish our petition and get that issue on the ballot. So at that point, the leader of the pro-zoning movement on city council, a fellow named Jim Greenwood, he got the council to agree to put the ordinance itself, which was then being written, on the ballot in November of that year. So that's what we ended up voting on. It was actually a two-step process. We voted on the ordinance itself in 1993. Voters turned it down soundly, but we had already turned in our signatures. And so we got another election in January 94 to amend the charter so that in the future, if ever the issue comes back up, they have to put it on the ballot after they've written the ordinance and give the public 6 months to study it. That's a big hurdle. And so never has the issue come up since that date. And what's also interesting is that as we're doing all this, the publicity, of course, was spreading far beyond Houston proper. And so property rights advocates in Alvin and Rosenberg contacted us and asked for help in stopping zoning in those cities. And so I went to both cities and helped the activists organize petition drives, and they managed to amend their charters. And so they have effectively kept zoning out of those cities.
Well, Houston is the largest city in the United States without zoning, if I'm
That is correct.
not
And what's
mistaken.
also interesting, the second largest city is right next door, is Pasadena.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what can you tell us about some projects that HPRA and yourself have going at maybe the state level?
Well, I should
Or the
mention
city
that
level,
we
actually.
meet. We don't deal much at the state level, but though I was recently up in Austin to testify on a bill that would actually make it hard to do what we think is probably the most effective way to be a change agent, which is amending charters in home rule cities. So we may have been successful in stopping that attempt to restrict our abilities to do that. And the idea is that we have Houston's a home rule city. Any city above 5,000 population qualifies to be home rule. You have to actually take a step to adopt a charter with a popular vote. But 350 cities in Texas have done that. And so the city I just mentioned to you, the Alvin and Rosenberg, they took the same step. That's why they've been able to protect themselves from zoning. And it's quite evidently a tool for really significant change in Texas politics. So I've been out explaining to people. I gave a workshop a couple of years ago in Elgin, and I've made presentations elsewhere. And I usually point out that this booklet, which is put out by the Lucy Burns Institute, a 30-page primer on charter amendments and other related local initiatives. And it sort of lays out the basic idea with some ideas on how to do it. I actually offer other documents I prepare, which is more Texas-centric. So in the last year or two or three, we've actually had over 8 petitions drives been kicked off in Texas. And they've already had a significant impact. One in San Antonio dealt with a proposed rail plan. There was no plan to let the people vote on that. This was a charter amendment to make that mandatory. And as soon as those signatures were turned in, the city and the county, both of which are going to put in about $30 million each to help pay for it, withdrew their grants. And the agency itself, called VIA in that city, killed the project. It actually put it on the back burner, but that's where it's going to die. So it had already had that impact just by having filed the petition. Then they got the vote on it on May 9th, when most cities in Texas had their municipal elections. The voters approved that amendment. So now if they're going to have any kind of rail system in San Antonio, they have to let the people vote on it. So there's a very successful example, saved $500 million. Recently, the city of San Marcos, let me explain. The city of Elgin. Elgin had some people in the city who were trying to get a rail link built from Austin, central Austin, to Elgin, and these people did not want that, and they think the bus service they have is just fine, and it's a lot cheaper. And so they got an issue they got their proposed a charter amendment on the ballot, and it was approved by the voters this past May 9th. That's another $500 million saved, because probably what they put in the charter will never be, a condition will never be met, and there will never actually be a rail line built from Austin to Elgin. So there's the power of getting a few hundred signatures and putting a policy change on the ballot. It means the grassroots in Texas can now recognize that we have a lot more power in these matters than we used to have. And all this, by the way, is a legacy from the populist era of the early 20th century. It was something that's been on the books all these years, and we just have not taken advantage of it.
Yeah, I guess it's the same thing that Charles was talking about. The government that you don't pay attention to is the government that keeps growing and doing other things, and mission creep and increased taxes and everything else. So seems like charter amendments, charter petitions seem to be an ideal way for a small group of activists to have an inordinate amount of effect on local policy. Now, there have been some setbacks for local charter amendments too, haven't they? Didn't the city of Denton try to ban fracking within city limits?
Right. There was an initiative. It was not actually a charter amendment. I think it was an initiative, which is adopting an ordinance, which is something different.
Oh.
It's not as good as a charter amendment. They probably didn't even know they had the option. They probably could have gone that way. But it really did upset the petroleum industry in Texas, and they managed to get a bill through the legislature that overturned that. And I think already there was a lawsuit to overturn it. So and they were warned in Denton that this was going to be resolved as they got that through. And so this is the outcome. Now there was a parallel attempt, which is still ongoing, hopefully it's dying, to make it more difficult to do a successful petition, or at least to get a proposed charter amendment on the ballot. It would give some officials at City Hall the discretion to reject your petition if they felt it would violate your ability to make a living or make an economic gain off your property. Very, very bad policy to give an elected official who you're trying to control with a charter amendment the discretionary power to reject your petition.
Was that even an elected position? I thought city secretaries are they elected or appointed?
They're appointed.
Yeah, so it was to give the city secretary the ability to reject it.
Well, it doesn't say doesn't give her the title, but it says she's the one you turn the petition into. And then this new law would say the city cannot accept a petition for counting if it would violate your ability for economic gain. Well, that contact person is the city secretary, so de facto it's her. So, of course, she would actually be doing it what the city city attorney might recommend, who would consult with the city council. Those are the ones you're trying to control with your charter amendment. So it's basically a dead end, and it would discourage any serious activists from doing a petition ever again. Now that's still alive. It's been passed the House. It was in the Senate committee. It's not emerged yet, and we're hoping it stays there, and hoping it never comes back up again.
But there is some interesting language in there that they don't want people passing charter amendments that actually violate your property rights, your use of your property. So it seems like this is a double-edged sword in a way.
Well, it may be appealing on the surface, but you're giving the elected official at City Hall, who you're trying to control, and almost anything you propose can be interpreted as would interfere with somebody's ability for economic gain from their property. The way to do these things is that even though you may be confident that it violates property rights, you have to let it go to the ballot, and if the voters approve it, then you can go to court, and the courts will overturn that. That's a proper judicial review. You don't want to put that in the hands of an appointed official at City Hall.
Okay, very good. Do you have anything to add to charter amendments, Charles?
Well, I just want to kind of piggyback on what both of you were saying. I think, like you said, it gives a good way for a small group to be able to make change. I think all too often people say that their voice isn't heard and that they can't do anything, but that's a cost-effective, easy, well, not easy, but it's easy enough if you want to do it, way to bring about change. And it gives people the option to present things to a city or to a body that they live in to be able to cause that change. So I think it's great, and I just want to piggyback on what you were saying.
Let me point out how easy it actually is. In two cases, well, in one case, in the city of Fredericksburg a couple of years ago, they managed to get all the signatures they needed in one day, on election day. So if you got your volunteers out at the polling sites and have a bit of luck, you can finish in one day. Though Texas gives you 180 days, half a year, to do it. Another city, in the city of Cleveland, they got 95% of what they needed on election day. They needed about 10 more signatures, so a little bit of block-bucking that following weekend, and they were done. So it actually can be extremely easy. I really recommend planning to do block walking, because with all the early voting taking place, you really can't count on all those people coming to the polls on election day. But a combination of block walking and or working on election day, you could finish a petition drive in the smaller cities of Texas in 2 or 3 weekends.
You mentioned that that's in Elgin about the rail issue being
Right.
something that they had done a successful charter amendment for. What are some of the other subjects that have been used, have charter amendments been used to try to control?
Well, I'm looking at my list right here, and what's interesting is that in several cases, even though the petition was successful and it was done according to the law with very good legal advice or based on a template prepared by a very capable lawyer, cities will reject the petition. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to have the citizens pass a law that would put some controls on how city spends the money. So they'll pretend that there's a flaw in your petition and then see if you can afford to take them to court. So in several cases, Willis and in San Antonio and in Sugar Land and in Cleveland, the city has taken a position there's a flaw in the petition. And in the case of San Antonio, they had the money to hire the lawyers to go in and negotiate with City Hall. City Hall conceded that they were wrong, and they did put that issue on the ballot. But in the meantime, as I pointed out, they already had withdrawn their grants to help build that rail line, so it was already dead. In the case of Willis, this is still an ongoing issue.
What was the issue there in Willis?
This is a very small city in Montgomery, about 7,000 population, and Montgomery County. And the issue was red light cameras. This one was an activist against red light cameras. The problem with red light cameras is what's called the short yellow. The city will tend to time it with a short yellow to maximize violation. That gives them lots of new revenue. They want to keep that. And oftentimes it goes to the police department, and so the police like them too. It's more money for their department. Well, they pretended in Willis that it would be contrary to Texas law to use a charter amendment to overturn a contract with a private vendor. This is the advice, the recommendation of the city attorney. That's not his job. It's not his job to do judicial review. That has to go to the voters first, and if approved, then the city might be able to go to court and get it overturned, but it has to let the voters decide first. So the activist in that case, who doesn't have the money or doesn't have the extra money to go to court, the issue is now in limbo. Another example is Richmond. You don't have to live in a city to do a petition, by the way. So I went out to Richmond last summer several times, and sometimes with friends, and we petitioned in that city. And the issue there was to make them put on the ballot a proposed zoning law, which has been then being written. And there was no plan to let the voters vote on that law. So I was trying to get it on the ballot, just like we managed to get it done here, and like they did in Alvin and Rosenberg. And it was turned in. We had plenty of extra signatures. We only needed about 251. We had over 300, and it was rejected on the flawed argument that because they had only recently adopted their charter for the first time the year before, and because Texas law requires 2 full years to lapse between one charter amendment and another one, or you can do more than at one time, but 2 full years have to separate those dates. Because only 1 year had passed since they adopted the initial charter, they could not put that issue on the ballot. Well, even if they're right about that, I'm not sure they are right, because this would have been the very first amendment, they still have to just hold it in a queue until that date comes up, and then they can put it on the ballot. So that was a flawed legal argument. They also had objections about the format, saying I didn't have each sheet notarized, which that's as commonly seen for a local initiative or for a referendum to overturn an ordinance, a newly adopted ordinance. But it's not required under Texas law to amend the charter. So 2 flaws in their legal arguments about why they couldn't accept the petition, though they did thankfully count them, so that was nice to know that we had passed that problem, or got past that problem. So again, it's a case where a lawyer is needed. Like many people who are activists, I don't have the money for a lawyer, so that too is in limbo.
I think you see that a lot with these local governments. They want to kind of flex their muscle a little bit and say that they have, the power and the means to fight this. And I mean, you saw it with Houston and the HERO Amendment, and the city secretary invalidated a number of signatures saying that they were illegible and stuff. So they just find these ways that are ridiculous to invalidate a petition or to say, it's not acceptable for some reason. You see that a lot.
Another example, by the way, is taking place right now in San Marcos. In that city, the issue is they want to get the fluoride out of the city water. The government medicates us by forcing us to have fluoride in our water. More and more cities are dropping fluoride. The Europeans don't do it for the most part. And so the health activists are very upset about this, and they want to get it out of the water. And they turned in their petition earlier this year, it was perhaps in January, and the city has rejected it. Claiming that, it's the usual argument that the sheets, the individual sheets are not notarized by the circulator, the person who got the signatures. They have a lawyer, and they have submitted, here I've got a copy of the letter here. It's looks like it's 4 pages long, in which he lays out the facts for the city council in San Marcos, explaining that they are wrong to reject that petition. I think they'll win this one because once they realize there's a lawyer involved, they can't play that game for very long. So I expect they'll get their election probably in November, and just like they did in San Antonio on the rail issue. And what was the other example where was Fredericksburg. In the case of Fredericksburg, they wanted to put some controls on how City Hall spent the surplus revenues that were piling up in their enterprise funds. And the city was using that as kind of a mad money on project that they liked, but the people did not like a golf course. And so they wanted to put a stop to that and require them to go to the voters to get approval to move money out of the surplus money around in the city budget. And they had to hire a lawyer because the city rejected it initially. Once the lawyer submitted his 4-page letter, City Council dropped their objection. They put it on the ballot. That was on the ballot May of last year.
Very good.
So, lawyer. Once you get a lawyer involved, then things start to shift in your favor.
Yeah, it's really a shame that once you manage to even get the incentive going to get some volunteers and all going, and you have jumped through all what you think are the legal hoops to file a correct position, even get sometimes even somebody at the city will give you approval that, this petition is okay, and the lawyer will say it's okay, and then you wind up getting the signatures and turning it in, and they say, oh, too bad, we don't think it is a valid position. And then you're in the unfortunate position of having to come up with a bunch of money, which you were trying to run this project on a volunteer basis to begin with, not thinking that money was going to be a big issue in it, and then you find yourself faced with a number of legal expenses unless you can find a pro bono some pro bono legal help to help you go forward with that case.
And that's precisely what happened in Sugar Land. Another case where an activist who wanted to get rid of the red light cameras they have in that city, and he turned in the signatures. He actually took his petition before he started getting signatures to the city secretary to see if there was any problem. She blessed it or refuses to reject it. I forget exactly what message was sent to Captain Van, is the guy who did this, that told him he had an okay petition. And then when he turns it in, they start to find these flaws again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Well, of course, one of the major issues with the legal procedure to do that has to do with Prop 2, which, as maybe our viewers are familiar with, that's the proposition that was filed back in 2004?
The election was 2004.
2004, which limited city revenue to presumably the effect of population growth plus inflation. And then, of course, the mayor and city council put a competing position on the ballot. Both of those positions received more than 50% of the vote, and the people that were involved with Prop 2 have made the case that they're not contradictory and that both of them should, in fact, be put into effect. Now, Prop 1 has been put into effect, and it's causing some severe rethinking at City Hall level, all the way down to wanting to repeal Prop 1 now. They're going to supposedly ask the voters to vote on that, and hopefully Charles and Empower Texans can marshal the troops against that kind of thing where that's already been, a cap already been improved. Now Prop 2, which has been up to the Texas Supreme Court already, I mean, you have to have bottomless pockets to fund a petition or a potential change that the city of Houston does not like, because they will drag it out so that they'll just break you financially before any ruling can be made on it if they're not if they think there's something at stake to protect them.
And one of the ironies in this case, David, is that Prop 2 was the one that was written by Bob Lemur, and my group actually organized a campaign to get the signatures and get it on the ballot. And as you point out, the mayor proposed it. That was Mayor White at the time. He didn't like what we had. He wanted something which was softer, he could live with. And so he had Prop 1 on the ballot. And then he pretended, because his petition, though they both got more than 50%, got more than, not petition, his proposition. Yeah. Got more than the one we were promoting, that ours didn't count. So the part of that legal activity was to make sure that the city recognized they're both valid, and in fact they're both harmonious. They can work together. They don't contradict each other.
Exactly.
And so, but now, the one that Mayor White at the time wrote and got and sold to the voters is now biting the current city establishment in the hiney, and they don't like this one bit, and now they want to get it out of the charter.
Right, exactly. That's what happens. Well, let's move on to what is our basically other main topic for evening discussion, and that's TERSs, like we mentioned at the beginning of the show. And let me tell you, there's a call-in number on the screen, viewers, so if you have any questions to ask of either of these guests of mine about either what their organizations or what they're doing, or about TERSs, which we're going to get into now, please do give us a call, and we will try to give you a fair hearing and get a straight answer for your question. I guess the first order of business about to proceed in a TERS discussion would be to actually get somebody to define what a TERS is, and I'm looking at Charles over there, that he could help us out and tell us exactly what a TERS is, Charles.
All right. Well, as you said before, they're tax increment reinvestment zones, and they're zones within the city that are, I guess the boundaries are decided by the people who petition city council to create them. So I think Barry mentioned before it was 50 people and 50% of the appraised property value in the area to create this zone. So once it's created, the property taxes theoretically locked in, and anything that accrues above that is reinvested in that area.
I think maybe Mark has a map in there that he might be able to pull up that shows us all the TERS zones in Houston, but then go ahead. Yeah, we've got quite a few of them, obviously.
Yeah, we have 25 TERS zones in the city, so I'm pretty sure we lead the pack as far as TERS zones. But
there they are up there.
Yeah, you can see them spread throughout all over the city, and the money gets reinvested back into them. Some of them are way more well performing than others, and some can't even afford to put fire hydrants and fix the streets, while others are doing things like bus lanes up on Post Oak. So you have a huge disparity in what the TERS are doing and the revenue that they're collecting. But
how does it work with their revenue issues? With how do they share that with the city and all? What's the incentive if I want to put together a TERS? Why would I want to do that?
Well, the point is supposed to be able to create economic development within your zone. So with that money that you collect with the increment, it gets reinvested in your area.
Why is there an increment?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, why is there something left over for me? What has the city done for me? They're going to freeze my property taxes at the current level? Is that what's going to happen?
Theoretically, that's what they say they're going to do, but they actually don't. It's just it's kind of a mathematical mixing up of the money, and it's not really what happens. But they say they will freeze it at that level, and then anything above that's
okay,
collected.
They'll freeze what the city takes.
What the city takes
at that level.
Right.
And whatever is over, the increment over that.
Right.
The people that are in charge of the
TERS board,
the unelected, the unelected body, unaccountable TERS board, they get to say how the money's
going to be spent. Yeah. So as you mentioned, there's the TERS board, who they're appointed officials. They're not elected, so they're not. The community doesn't get together and decide that they want these people to represent them, which is a problem within its own right. But they decide where this extra money is going to be spent, and like I said, it's used on different things that are supposed to encourage economic development in areas that otherwise wouldn't see it in a timely manner. But as we've noticed with areas such as the Galleria and the Uptown Tours, you're going to get economic development in that area. People, people want to develop in that area. It's
it's supposed to be blighted in order
right,
to get
exactly,
get an
it's the
investment, right?
15th largest business district in the country. People want to develop there, but yet for some reason this money, it still needs to be locked in that area and be reused for economic development.
Gets to be
purposes.
redefined as being blighted and underdeveloped.
I should point out at the time when they created that, they were pointing to the congestion in Uptown and said this is the evidence of the blight. Of course, congestion is a sign of prosperity and growth, but they were able to turn that on its head and argue that the area was blighted because of congestion.
I see. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Convoluted.
Speak a little bit more about congestion up there. The project they're working on now that TERS wants to do is the Post Oak bus lane, which it's very a divisive problem up there. You see a lot of store owners and residential owners don't want the project done, while the TERS board is pushing forward with it, and they've created a website. I think it's called like Save Uptown or something like that, and they're really pushing forward to get it stopped. But the board doesn't want to listen to them, obviously, and you have that problem up there, and I think that's one of the problems that happens with an unelected board of officials. They go ahead and use this money that was collected to do what they think is best for people, while the residents and the taxpayers of that area totally want something different, but they're obviously not going to be listened to because they didn't elect these people.
Well, it's like, I guess, when we were looking into and campaigning with the against the light rail project here in Houston, it brings up the veterinary model of health. And that is, what you do is, if you're in charge of fixing something, like you're on the TERS board, what you do, it's like somebody bringing their dog to the vet. You talk to the owner of the dog and you decide what's best for the dog. And that's what happens with the businesses
Right.
on Post Oak. The TERS board and the other people decide what's best for the consumers or the transportation people, and they said, oh, well, we need a bus lane. Well, the people that need the bus lane are the infrastructure developers, the contractors,
Right.
the architects, the planners.
Right.
That's who are the real customers of these transportation projects, not the people that are going to be riding the transportation.
Right. And if you look at the notes and things taken at a lot of these meetings, the Metro board chairman, Metro is going to be running the buses up and down Post Oak, he said that the numbers for ridership aren't there. He said that the ridership numbers are going to be abysmal, but if they build it, they will come. That's kind of the way they're looking at it. So it seems to be just a waste of money to kind of line some people's pockets, to make it more aesthetically pleasing, to fall in line with what the mayor's personal goals are, and just different things like that, more so than it is to benefit the people living and working up there.
That's for sure. And I think it is the way with most transportation projects in big cities these days. The real customers are the people that are going to make money building it, and not the people that are going to be spending on
and the recipients of the campaign contributions that will follow.
Oh, yes, for sure. Those, we don't want to forget about those, do we? So, no, that's correct. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the governance of these TERS boards. I understand you have to, or you can, have one of your state, if your state representative has some territory on the board, they're an automatic member of the board.
I'm not too clear on the governance of the board, but that does sound right.
And there, there's like 9 or 15 people on the board.
I know, I'm not sure about the state representative part, but I know that a few are appointed by the mayor, city council, HISD, or the school district.
You have to have a school district member
and
a state rep.
And county.
And a county rep. Okay,
Yeah,
so there's 3 out of 15.
Yeah.
And then the mayor gets to report the rest, right? So it's pretty locked down a majority about how the cash might flow.
Right.
That,
you can imagine that most of the people appointed generally fall in line with the ideas that she wants, and,
yes,
and
for
that's
sure.
how you see the
That's how
project
you get
proceed.
appointed. Yes, for sure. Their checkbook follows those lines too. So, well, how long are these boards appointed for? Do they have any sunset provisions on them?
I think it can be longer than 4 years in Texas, so probably a maximum of 4 years.
A maximum of 4 years?
For an individual appointment to a board.
Oh, for the appointment. Yeah. No, I'm talking about the board.
The TERS district itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, the zone. Well, they unfortunately don't have sunset periods, and I think that's a point that a lot of people want to see, is that they should have a sunsetting period where they do shut down, or at least a revision period where they come back before City Council and have to justify their ongoing operations and why they need to still be there. Because if that was the case, coming with the Uptown Tours, if they had to come back to City Council and justify why they needed to be in that blighted area, I think they would have been shut down a long time ago.
Especially if they looked at the ridership numbers that they're going to have on the bus line, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that what the law is missing is a feature that would let the victims of this process do a petition to put the issue on the ballot to undo or dissolve the TERS. There's nothing in the law that allows for that.
Yeah. Well, of course, the first thing that the TERS does when they're elected is issue a bunch of bonds, right?
Yeah.
Not in every case. Sometimes I just work with cash, pay-as-you-go kind of stuff, but many do issue bonds.
Yeah, I know that. I remember Sharpstown and some of these other areas talking about bonds even in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so to shut down an agency that's collecting revenue that has a bond out would be kind of iffy. Okay, well, we have a call coming in. So caller, could you identify yourself, and if you have a question for one of our panelists here, please? We have a call coming in, Mark? Well, I'm getting a message. We have a call coming in, but I don't hear anybody.
It's me. It's Bob Lemur.
Oh, Bob Lemur, our old compatriot. Yes, sir. How are you this evening?
Pretty good. I'm out and about and taking care of business, and have not been able to catch your show live, Dave.
Okay.
Comments.
Well, please go ahead and give us some information that I know you have been gathering about TERSs and what you think of their effect on the city finances and revenue.
Well, I have a number of comments, Dave. I think I heard you talking about renewing the TERSs, trying to justify their existence when they get renewed. I've observed the city council's actions when they supposedly check, compliance when they renew them and so forth. But that's all just a rubber stamp. I've seen council, and each time I notice what they're doing, they waived all of the requirements when they initiated the TERS, when TERS first came into being, and also when they were renewed. That their oversight is laughable. It's just non-existent. They waived every requirement every time I saw it, except one. I forget what it was. So the oversight is just absolutely not there. And I called the state comptroller's office to see what they did about, checking compliance, et cetera. They have zero oversight. The guy admitted that all they do is they merely file those reports when they come in. They do nothing. He said they have no requirement that they do anything as far as oversight of the persons. So oversight is totally lacking. I think it's just a matter of the rich getting richer at the expense of the poor, quite frankly. Several of the TERS that are really not doing what they're supposed to, in other words, trying to develop the blighted areas that they're developing, the developed areas, like over at the Galleria, you name it. So I think they're a total waste of time. I think they ought to be shut down.
Can I interrupt here? Bob, I think you've indicated that already that these TERS are collecting 10% of the total city revenue every year. How much does that amount to?
It's over a tenth.
What does that amount to in dollars?
Well, it's over $100 million a year. They're scraping a tenth off the top, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. There's no oversight. The city's keeping accounting for them in effect off the books. They're netting it against their total property tax revenue and not showing how much that they're distributing to the TERSs. The whole thing is a farce as far as I'm concerned. I think they ought to shut them down.
Didn't Mayor White try to do that some years ago, Bob?
He expressed a desire to do it. That's about the only thing I've ever agreed to fight on, but I think they all should have shut him down then.
Okay.
It is just an absolute giveaway.
Let me interject. Years ago, we saw the first TERS appear in the local paper. It was the Midtown TERS, I believe, and the mayor at the time was Bob Lanier, and he objected. He said, this is not a good idea. It would be a case of some people being favored by a law that causes the rest of the community to sacrifice for them, for these developers who control the TERS. That was Bob Lanier's first reaction. Within a few months, he had dropped that objection. He figured out a way that he could actually use that for his purposes too. So he became an advocate of TERS, or certainly a person who went along with the newer ones that came up during his term in office.
Yep, money talks.
Okay, Bob. Well, thank you for calling in and sharing that information with us. Appreciate it.
All right.
I know personally, when the TERS first came out, I wasn't. I thought, well, this is kind of a good idea. You let people
Spend their own money?
Spend their own money. And what I didn't realize was that the money that they were going to let them spend was going to be taken away from what the city might be spending
Right.
on water, infrastructure, firemen and police in my area.
Yeah.
So my residential property taxes keep going up by 10% every year, and these guys over here, theirs are frozen, at least at the city level, and they get to play around with the excess money that they have, which they've done near Memorial City, and they've done a really fine job with all the landscaping and all the little increments and goodies that they put around the neighborhood. I'm really impressed, but I'm not as impressed when I realize that it's at my expense that that's happening also. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we may have another caller if we could patch that in, Mark, if they've hung around.
Well, to your argument before, what you were saying about your taxes going up and everything, it's funny because the city, not all of city council, but some on city council and the mayor argue that we need to remove the voter-imposed tax cap to be able to bring more money to fund emergency services. But as Bob said, $100 million, if not more, is going into these districts. So if that money was freed up, we'd be looking at a different, predicament we'd be in. So it's just crazy the way that they word the argument in order to get people to kind of fall on their side when, you're not looking at the revenue that's coming in from TERS's. And another thing is that the TERS revenue doesn't even count towards the property tax cap.
Right.
That's completely, off to the side of it. So this is additional revenue that they're bringing in that doesn't count towards the amount that they're allowed to bring in. So they can't even make the argument with all of this excess money they're sitting on.
Prop 2, which is still being litigated, would have counted the TERS money in the cap.
Okay, I see.
So that's one of the things that's being litigated. And of course, one of the ramifications of that is, I think Paul Betancourt pointed out in one of his op-eds is, well, if we did have Prop 2 and we did take the TERS money back into the city would have to pay back the property tax owners because they would exceed the cap.
Right.
So they couldn't use the money anyway. So anyway, it's hard to make the argument that they'd have the money for more important services when the cap would have hit that already. So anyway.
I'd like to point out that we didn't actually point out to the audience that Bob Lemur is a retired CPA, and he's made the study of the city's budget sort of his retirement hobby.
Yeah, right.
And more than simply the city of Houston, he's really got a good handle on the county and the school districts and even the state. So he's very, very authoritative. I'd like to point out another way they abuse the concept of the TERS is to avoid letting the voters vote on projects which are actually pretty big projects, like the soccer stadium. That was funded with county money and city money, and they took an existing TERS and they expanded it to take in the territory where the soccer stadium was built, and they dedicated that new revenue to help pay for that. And I think they even created another TERS to help pay for it, to bring in some additional monies. And so normally they would put something like that on the ballot for the voters to approve through long-term bonds. They managed to avoid letting the public weigh in on these questions, and that way they were able to, in this case, the primary owner of the Dynamo team is a billionaire who lives in Europe. And that's how bizarre these policy outcomes are.
Yeah, I've noticed here in some of the documentation I have here, the actual 2014 TERS revenue was $135.9
Yep.
million,
Ah,
which is not going into, or at least not being controlled by the city and been delegated out to other people. Now, it used to be, evidently, and I'm not sure exactly when this got changed, the state had limited the amount of, and I'm not sure how they measured it, whether it was by geographical area or by maybe revenue, probably.
I think it's appraised value.
Appraised value, probably. And it was at 15%. You couldn't have more of your revenue base, more than 15%, put into TERS. Well, as you probably read in the Chronicle, quite surprisingly, that over 50% of the lobbyists in Austin are being paid by government agencies of local, county, or probably even state. So people are using our tax dollars to lobby against the interests of the taxpayer in favor of more government expenditures. Well, they got the limit changed from 15% to 25%.
Right.
So then the cities can go back to the TERS business again, creating more of these districts, funneling off more of that money, and then claiming that they don't have any money for essential services because the special interests have siphoned off the money.
I think it's worth pointing out that what we're seeing here is another example of that was more and more recognized as a problem with government across the country, which is the creation of special districts. The special interests find a way to get the government to serve their interests without getting the ordinary person involved. So they managed to create a special district. And another example of this are the management districts. We've got lots of those in Houston now. I don't know how many we have in the country. But going back to the TERS, the very first TERS was created in California back in the 60s. And the purpose there was to find to create a pot of money and pretend it was brand new money. And so they could then turn around and apply to the federal government for a federal grant. So that was, again, it's another example of the perverse incentives of federal grants at the local level. So that's what happened with the initial TERSs. It takes a while for these things to ramp up, and then it just catches on like a contagion. And so I think like in Chicago, I think they've got like 70 TERSs now. For a long time, there was a source of contention between the mayor of Chicago and the city council about who's going to control the TERS money. No longer does the mayor have it as a slush fund for his agenda. Now the city council gets to share in how they spend that money for their own purposes. So it's a growing, not only Houston or Texas problem, it's a national problem.
Yeah, and to interject really quickly, you were saying before that the TERS revenue last year was, I think, 139 million. Well, shortly after the revenue cap was imposed, I think it was 2006 was when the TERS revenue was only 30 million. So you can see how it's skyrocketed since then, just because of expansion and stuff. And to your point with City Council, I think it would be great to give City Council more power and stuff like that. But unfortunately, in Houston, where City Council doesn't have too much power with the mayor, I guess we're stuck with what we've got right now. So.
Well, my point is not that they should be sharing these decisions with the council, but it's simply it becomes a political football, and there is a power fight to see who can get to spend the money, which benefits the politicians who are authorizing the spending.
Right. Yeah, well, the problem is that the next crisis that comes around, like Charles says, is they say, oh, we don't have any money. Like the firefighters, pensions and things like that. Oh, we got to raise taxes. Oh, well. What about all this money that the TERS is using to build landscaping out on the highway? Maybe we should fund the firefighters' pensions instead of putting in more azaleas or something. Right.
or helping that European billionaire make more money off his soccer team.
Yeah, right. Something like that. So anyway, well, golly, I hope we've been able to raise some public awareness about TERSs and at least, although we don't get to vote on them, unfortunately, maybe your city council rep or someone.
What we can do, we can amend the charter to stop it. All it takes is 20,000 signatures.
20,000 signatures. Well, we just need a few good, able block walkers out there to collect 20,000 signatures. Not that we haven't done it before, right, Barry?
Well, in a big city, you actually need to have some hired help.
Yeah, I think so. Usually, it's. There's a lot better things to do with your time on the weekends than going out and collecting signatures, quite frankly. I mean,
Well, no, in a big city, you have to rely on major donors to get it done. But we have, in Texas, we have lots of small cities where the activists can do it. Yeah,
sure. I mean,
for instance, in Harris County, we've got 21 home rule cities. 20 are small enough where the activists can get it done.
Yeah, so that is an avenue that they could do. Small cities have with TERS too, or are they probably?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, really? Even the smaller
Even
home
small,
rule
they,
cities have-
maybe not as often as we see it in Houston, but they have tours in some of them.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess once you find a money pot somewhere, it's hard to keep those
Right.
politicians away from it. So, well, okay. Any other? We're going to be ready to close this down in a few minutes, but I wonder if there's any other subjects near and dear to anyone's heart that they would like to impart. I would certainly like to encourage our viewers to look into both Empower Texas and to the HPRA organization. Barry has a meeting every Friday at the Lambeau Chinese restaurant on Westheimer, near Hillcroft, near
It's about a mile west of Chimney Rock.
Chimney Rock.
Yeah, it's on
okay,
the
close
south
to
side.
Chimney Rock, and he has some very interesting speakers, some of whom you probably see on this show from time to time. And so we encourage you to show up at that and get to meet some of the people there and see some of the issues that Barry is putting in front of the local populace as well.
Can I mention the phone numbers? People can
Sure,
contact
go
me
ahead,
and
yeah.
get on the list to get the email notice.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, my number is 713-224-4144, and that's a personal number, and you can call me, and I'll get your email address, put you on the contact list. You get one paragraph a week announcing the speaker.
Okay, and there are usually some very interesting and sometimes controversial speakers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That they have. So anyway, have you been a speaker there yet, Charles?
I did speak on, I think was it red lights or a petition or something? Yeah, I have, briefly. And
He was
one of
not
my
the scheduled speaker, but sometimes
Yeah.
we'll slip somebody in and give them a few minutes.
One of those hangers on.
I
Okay.
kind of got plucked up last minute, but one of my former coworkers did speak there
Right.
around the time that I started with Empower Texans. So.
Okay. Well, maybe we can get Michael over sometime.
I am sure he'd love to.
From Austin to try to do that. Okay, so have you have any plans to go back to Austin soon, or?
No,
I know you have an organization. Do you have an event too that comes up? What? Once a month?
We have our happy hours once a month where we get out here. Our Austin staff comes down to Houston and they kind of just meet people who have supported us and meet people who want to support us and just want to kind of expand the Liberty movement. And we have a happy hour coming up on June 9th. The location, we don't have it yet. We're going to update that on our website,
okay.
though, empowertexans.com. And yeah, like I said, we have it once a month where our staff comes out. And it's a good time. It's a good time. First two
Okay.
drinks are generally on us, too. So
All right.
pass that up.
So those are two ways if you're motivated to do something about what a lot of us see as this encroaching leviathan at both the federal, state, and local level, and would like to do something to try to roll back the tide and promote individual liberty. Let me encourage you to follow along with either one of these organizations. And thank you for watching us tonight. And we will try to be back in another month or so with some equally interesting local activists to talk about public policy issues that should be of interest to most Houston viewers. Thanks for joining us.